Hey everyone, welcome to my first devlog. Today I want to show you what I've accomplished over the past 3 months. Well, it hasn't really been 3 full months, but January is over and I've decided to release a devlog on the first Sunday of every month. The game I'm working on is an RPG with turn-based combat. I've come up with my own combat system, but I'll talk more about that next time. I haven't actually started working on it yet. Instead, I've been super focused on the story. In fact, I've been refining it for the past 2 years. Player decisions will shape the game in big ways, not just a few dialogues, but the whole experience. The places you visit, the enemies you face, and even your allies will change. For example, someone who's your ally in one playthrough could be your enemy in another. Since making a game like that would take forever, I'm planning to release it in chapters. That way, people can play a new chapter every year instead of waiting 10 years for a finished game. Think of it like a TV series or manga that comes out regularly, just on a yearly schedule. Sure, I could cut down the story, but I don't want to. This is my dream game. I know everyone on YouTube seems to be making their dream game, but I'm not just starting out. I've been programming for 10 years and making games for 8. I'll tell you more about my journey in the next chapter. My journey into game dev started back in 2015. In school we had these 2 weeks where we didn't have normal classes, just different projects. I signed up for programming for beginners because I've always loved creating stuff. After the school project where I learned the basics, I realized, wow, programming's actually fun. So I kept going on my own, back then with Python. In 2017 I wanted to make my own Pokemon game because I was a huge Pokemon fan. I found out about RPG Maker and Pokemon Essentials, which seemed like a good starting point. RPG Maker was only €5 on Steam, so I ran to the store, bought a €50 Steam gift card and thought, might as well go all in. After about 100 hours, I gave up on the Pokemon project. It was just too much work and honestly, 16-year-old me was more into playing games than making them. I took a break, but in 2019 I thought, why not make an RPG? That's gonna be easier. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Making an RPG means designing the world, and coding, and drawing, and making music, and so much more. So in 2019 I started my first dream game. I never finished it, but it was super important for my growth. I spent a lot of time on pixel art, which became the foundation for my current skills. Sure, it didn't look great back then, but I learned a lot. I worked on the RPG for about a year, on and off. Most of my time went into reworking the character creation over and over again. Unfortunately, I have no footage from the development process of this game because I created it on an old crappy laptop. In 2020 I finally got myself a proper PC. I even worked a bit more on my RPG, but then life kind of got in the way. School was done, parties were happening, and honestly, I was just living in the moment. Still, I kept doing small projects here and there, mostly just for myself. Around that time, I also joined the game jam with a friend. We had 72 hours to make a game and I pulled an all-nighter to get my part done. The next day I was so dead I couldn't do much, but it didn't matter because my part was finished. My friend wrapped up the rest and we ended up placing second. It was fun and I also gained a bit of prize money, but I realized game jams aren't really my thing. I don't like being forced to be creative under pressure, it kind of kills the fun for me. I properly got back into game dev at the end of 2023. This time I wanted to make a multiplayer horror game, something like Lethal Company, because it was blowing up back then. Well, I ended up dropping that project too, but it wasn't a total waste. I learned a lot about multiplayer programming. When things worked, it was super satisfying. When they didn't, well, you can imagine. After that, I decided to work on something smaller, a 3D horror game, just to gain some experience in 3D. But I dropped that after a few months too. It just didn't feel right. That's when I realized I want to make an RPG again, but in 2D, not in 3D. So in October 2024 I started a new Unity project. I created the main character, wrote a movement script and even designed a couch. Then I didn't touch it for a month. My motivation just completely disappeared, mainly because I wasn't happy with the graphics. 1 month later, in November, I gave it another shot, but this time I had a little helper, an AI that created pixel art templates for me. They weren't perfect, but they gave me a starting point and brought my motivation back. And with that, I finally laid the foundation for the RPG I've been working on the past 3 months.
Hello, how's it going? Hey, good to hear. I'm doing well too, thanks.
Hi, are you here to get your hair colored?
Thank you for your purchase.
What you just saw is almost the entire first scene of the first chapter. The only thing missing is the first battle, which will also serve as a tutorial. Hopefully I can show you that next month. But let's start at the beginning. The main menu doesn't really exist yet. The only thing you can do here is choose your language. I decided to implement multiple languages right from the start. Currently it's just English because I'm fairly fluent in English, and German because it's my native language. This way the system is already set up for multiple languages and it will be much easier to add more later on. Next up is the character creation. I wanted to give players some basic options to customize their character, but I've never been a big fan of assigning individual skill points at the start, especially when you don't have an idea what the stats even mean. So I went with a simpler approach. You just pick a characteristic and the stats are assigned automatically based on that. Since stats will evolve throughout the game depending on your playstyle, it doesn't really matter what you pick in the beginning. After the character creation there's a bit of story. I'll show as little of the story as possible in these devlogs, no spoilers. Once the intro is over, you can move around freely. You're just a regular, boring person in your apartment. The problem? You're hungry. So you head to the market to grab some food. On the way you can interact with NPCs or just ignore them. Maybe you'll find something interesting if you explore a bit. Or you could stop by the barber and try out a new style. Or not, totally up to you. When you're ready, you can complete the first main quest and go shopping. Once you've packed your grocery bag, it's time to head home and finally enjoy that well-earned meal. Ha! Wrong. Something happens and you get dragged into your first fight. Well, you would if the fight was actually done. For now, it's more like you're threading the air with your moves. That's pretty much all I've implemented so far. I've been making sure to write the code as flexible as possible. For example, NPC conversations only require text and a few variables to work, and transitions between locations just need the coordinates of the new position. Overall, I try to avoid hard coding as much as I can. Now I want to dive into two topics more in detail: graphics and sound. Let's start with... I tried out a bunch of different graphic styles for this game before settling on the current one. Initially I started with a tiny 32x32 player sprite and planned to build the game world around that. But I quickly abandoned that and switched to a 64x64 character. Sure, it's twice the work to draw, but the 32x32 size just didn't give me the level of detail I needed to convey the story visually. Especially when it comes to later designs for characters and enemies. At first I used an AI generated character as the player and modeled the first room. Here's what the room looked like. Aside from the walls, most of it was still AI generated and unchanged. The main reason for this was that I wanted to quickly create a visual concept for the scene. It's much faster to generate placeholder graphics with AI than to draw everything myself from scratch. Later on, I used these AI graphics as a base and redrew everything. Some things were heavily altered, others less so. What I did draw completely from the start though was the character design. For this I got my inspiration from Pinterest. The graphics I found there matched the look I had in mind. You can clearly see similarities, especially in the head shape and the hair. Later I found out that these graphics actually came from a mobile defense RPG game, which looks pretty cool to be honest. But hey, I'm a real gamer and don't play mobile games. Oh well, too bad. Once I had my character, I moved on creating the walking animations, which I reworked multiple times. Now I'm finally happy with them. For the main character, I need to make 3 versions of each animation: male, female with short hair and female with long hair. Since I want players to be able to change their hair color, I had to animate the hair separately and layer it over the character. That way I can easily change the hair color in Unity without accidentally turning the whole character into an orc. I have 2 backups of my work, one from mid-December and one from mid-January. Here you can see the graphical evolution side by side. While I was still refining the interiors, I started working on the outdoor areas and immediately ran into a new problem. The AI I use can't create decent maps, not even ones good enough for prototypes. So I had to draw the map tiles myself. Inside the house this was relatively straightforward since I only needed walls and floors. But outside I needed grass, roads, sidewalks, house facades and roofs. At first I experimented with a highly detailed style, trying to cram in as many colors and shadows as possible. But I wasn't satisfied with the results. So I created several variations, including one that only used 1 to 3 colors per surface. I initially thought this style would look too boring, but in the end, it was the one I chose. A simpler style shifts the focus to the characters and prevents the overall image to look too cluttered. Plus, it's much easier to draw. With that decision made, I redrew all the graphics to match the new style. The only exception to this were trees and plants. I used AI-generated versions of these with minimal adjustments, like fixing pixel errors or tweaking the outlines. Sure, I'd love to draw every single graphic myself, but that would take forever. If I spent an entire day drawing a tree that would end up looking worse than the AI versions, I never finish this game. Instead, I focus on the important stuff like characters or designs that the AI struggles with. Toilets, for example. All that practice has really paid off there. Even after finishing the outdoor world, it felt a bit empty and off. Something was missing. Shadows. So I added simple shadows indoors and outdoors. Once I finished the player's house and the outside area, I moved on to the hair salon and the market. The hair salon was surprisingly easy to design, but the market was much trickier. Despite working in a market myself and knowing exactly how one looks like, it was hard to recreate it in the game. At first the cashier awkwardly stood in front of the counter, and the only other features were some shelves and a very poorly AI generated NPC. Eventually I took another look at my workplace for reference and added some refrigerators and posters. The cashier now stands behind the counter where he belongs. One last thing I want to mention is the character portraits for the NPCs and the player. These portraits appear in the UI during conversations to show who's speaking. They are a lot of work, but I'm really happy with how they turned out, and I doubt I will make a lot of changes to them in the future. Let's talk about the music. I've been using placeholder tracks as background music because I don't have much experience composing music yet. I'd like to improve my skills before diving fully into creating my own tracks. That said, learning how to compose has been a lot of fun, and I'm really excited for the day I can create the exact music I imagine for the game. Until then, placeholders help me get a better feel for the scenes. For me, adding music was a turning point in this project. Once I included music and could fully experience the scene, it was the first time I thought this could actually become something. That's when I decided to share the project in a devlog.
Hi, are you here to get your hair colored?
For the first time, the game felt complete, even if only in a rough form, and that really motivated me to pour even more time into it. This is also why I'm creating the game from start to finish, scene by scene, rather than completing all the mechanics first, then the graphics, and then all the sound and music. By doing it this way, I don't have to work on the same type of task endlessly. One day I'll be coding, the next I'll work on graphics, and then I can spend some time on music. It keeps things fresh and fun. It also gives me more flexibility when it comes to developing the story. I already have a general framework for the story, the world building is mostly done, and the first chapter is fully planned. Beyond that though, nothing is completely set in stone yet. I have a clear vision of what the characters are like and the direction the story will take, but how exactly the characters will reach their goals will still open to change.
Thank you for your purchase.
I've mapped out a few storylines up until chapter 3, but overall the story will evolve as I continue working on the game. The first chapter, however, is going to be fairly linear. The idea is to ensure all players come away with the same foundational understanding of the world. With music checked off, let's move on to the sounds. There's honestly not too much to say here. I didn't create the sounds myself. There are plenty of great free sound effects available online, and I'm pretty happy with them. So far I have footstep sounds, car sounds, door sounds, quest sounds and a chest sound. And that's pretty much it. I don't want to overload the game with too many sound effects, so I've been keeping things simple. One last thing I wanted to talk about is the voiceover for the characters. I've decided to have the characters voiced by AI. I went back and forth on this decision for a long time. Unfortunately, hiring real voice actors just isn't within my budget, so my choice was either to use AI generated voices or skip voiceovers completely. In the end, I decided to include voiceovers while giving the players the option to turn them off. However, I'm not just taking the first result the AI spits out. I try to tweak the voices as much as possible to match how I imagine them. This can get super frustrating when the AI just doesn't cooperate, but the results are worth it when everything comes together. So that's my progress after 3 months. Honestly, I'm really happy with how things are shaping up, but I'd also love to hear what you think. I appreciate every comment, feedback is always super important. Maybe I'm so deep in my own bubble that I'm missing some obvious mistakes. This video ended up being way longer than I planned, but once I started writing the script, I just couldn't stop writing. Anyway, the next devlog, which should drop on March the 2nd, will hopefully be much shorter, since it'll only cover 1 month of work instead of almost 10 years of history. I hope I'll see you again for that. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate a like, and if you don't want to miss any future updates, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for your time and see you in 4 weeks. Bye.